Jack had lived in the heart of the forest for over a decade, carving out a solitary existence among the towering pines and whispering winds. A seasoned woodsman, he was well-versed in the rhythms of nature, his hands calloused from years of toiling under the open sky. The scent of pine and earth was as familiar to him as his own breath. Yet lately, an unsettling chill had crept into his bones, one that had little to do with the biting cold of winter. He had always prided himself on his resilience, on being a man of action who could handle whatever the wilderness threw at him. But strange occurrences began to plague him. Flickering shadows at the edge of his vision, rustling leaves when no wind stirred, and an inexplicable sense of being watched. Each night, as he lay in his small cabin, the creaking wood and howling winds became a cacophony of fear, igniting a paranoia that gnawed at him like an insatiable beast. Jack's past haunted him as much as any ghost. Memories from a fateful hunting trip long ago flashed before his eyes, faces of friends lost to the unforgiving wilds. He tried to brush these thoughts aside, attributing them to fatigue and isolation, but they clung to him like fog on a winter morning. The forest was alive with whispers, tales spun by locals about the Wendigo, a creature born from hunger and despair. Some dismissed it as folklore meant to frighten children. Others spoke of it with grave seriousness. As Jack ventured deeper into his familiar territory each day, he felt an ever-present tension, a sense that something was waiting for him beyond the treeline. The exhilaration he once felt in nature began to twist into dread, each snap of a twig echoing like a death knell. Unbeknownst to him, the Wendigo's breath was already on his neck, drawing closer with every heartbeat. The forest loomed around Jack like a vast, inhospitable ocean of white, the trees standing as silent sentinels draped in heavy blankets of snow. Each branch was laden with frost, sparkling like shards of glass under the pale winter sun. Yet the light struggled to penetrate the thick canopy above. Shadows clung to the ground, creating an illusion of depth that made the simple act of walking feel treacherous. The biting cold seeped into Jack's bones, sapping his strength and fueling an ever-growing sense of unease. As he stepped outside his cabin, the crunch of snow beneath his boots echoed in the still air, a sound that seemed to amplify his loneliness. The world around him was devoid of life. Even the birds had retreated, leaving only the haunting whispers of the wind that weaved through the trees. It howled mournfully, carrying with it the chill of isolation, each gust a reminder of how far removed he was from civilization and safety. In the distance, towering evergreens loomed like ancient guardians, their dark silhouettes contrasting against the pure white backdrop. Yet there was no comfort in their presence. Instead, they felt more like silent watchers, judging his every move. The forest had taken on a sinister quality, twisting familiar paths into labyrinths of obscurity where dread lurked behind every trunk and stone. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent shivers down Jack's spine. He could feel a weight in the air, heavy and oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath in anticipation. The isolation began to gnaw at him, coiling tighter with each passing moment. As twilight approached, painting the sky in ominous hues of gray and purple, Jack sensed an unseen presence encroaching upon him, a reminder that running would not save him now. The Wendigo's breath whispered through the trees, drawing closer with every heartbeat. The legend of the Wendigo is as chilling as the winter winds that sweep through the forest, steeped in centuries of Algonquin folklore. Believed to be a malevolent spirit, the Wendigo embodies insatiable hunger and relentless greed, forever cursed to wander frozen landscapes in search of sustenance. It is said that when a person succumbs to extreme hunger or desperation, often in harsh winters, they might transform into this monstrous being, losing their humanity and embracing a ravenous desire for flesh. In tales shared by campfires among Native American tribes, the Wendigo manifests as an emaciated creature with gaunt features and cold, hollow eyes that seem to pierce through the soul. Covered in frost and resembling a skeletal figure, it moves with an unnatural speed, slipping silently through the trees. The stories tell of its voice, an echoing whisper carried by the wind, that can mimic loved ones, luring unsuspecting victims deeper into the perilous woods where it waits. both a cautionary tale and a reflection of deeply rooted fears regarding survival. The Wendigo myth serves as a reminder of how isolation can twist minds and lead good people to darkness. Hunters and travelers would heed warnings from elders about avoiding those who act strangely or display signs of madness. These were thought to be under the Wendigo's influence or cursed by their own greed. Jack had heard these stories whispered among locals during his early years in the forest. Dismissive at first, he now felt their weight more than ever. As he sat alone at night, shadows flickering across his cabin walls as candlelight danced, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched. The legend pulsed in his mind like a heartbeat. A creeping fear brought to life by not just folklore but by an all-too-real menace lurking just beyond his vision. It began with an unsettling stillness, a silence so profound that it pressed against Jack's ears as he worked outside his cabin. The usual sounds of the forest, chirping birds and rustling leaves, had faded, replaced by an oppressive quiet that felt alive, almost watchful. He paused, wiping the sweat from his brow despite the winter chill. A shiver ran down his spine, an instinctive warning that made him glance over his shoulder. The trees felt closer, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. As twilight deepened, Jack ventured further into the woods to check his traps, each step crunching loudly in the snow. That's when he first heard it, a low growl resonating from somewhere deeper in the shadows. It was not the growl of any animal he recognized. It was guttural and alien, sending ripples of dread through him. He dismissed it as a trick of the wind, convincing himself that his nerves were heightened by isolation and fear. Still, his heart raced as he quickened his pace. Fleeting shadows danced at the corner of his vision, darting behind trees before he could turn to confront them. Jack paused to listen closely. All he heard was the whisper of the wind, but something else lurked beneath it. A faint rustling, like footsteps gliding through the underbrush. The sensation of being stalked clung to him like a second skin. He felt eyes on him, cold and predatory. Suddenly, a figure emerged from behind a tree. A fleeting glimpse of something tall and emaciated, its body almost lost among the dark bark. Jack's breath caught in his throat as it vanished just as quickly as it appeared. Panic surged within him as he turned to flee back toward his cabin. He couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and hungry was tracking his every move, waiting for the moment he would realize running wouldn't save him now. The nights grew longer and more tormenting for Jack, each passing moment amplifying his fears. Sleep became a luxury he could no longer afford, the shadows in his cabin morphing into monstrous shapes that danced just beyond the flickering candlelight. His mind spiraled deeper into paranoia. Every creak of wood and gust of wind felt like a whisper of the lurking presence he could not shake. He could almost feel the Wendigo's breath on the back of his neck, each chilly exhalation filling him with dread. Jack became obsessive in his awareness of the forest surrounding him. During daylight hours, he would pace outside his small cabin, straining to catch any sign of movement among the trees, squinting into the white horizon where shadows lingered. The feeling of being hunted gnawed at him constantly, eroding any vestige of calm he might have held onto. Each snap of a twig sent adrenaline racing through his veins, prompting him to scan for silhouettes hidden within the boughs. His conversations with himself turned frantic and fractured, questions racing in and out of his thoughts like deer dodging through underbrush. "Am I losing my mind?" he would mutter softly, fingers trembling as he fidgeted with his hunting knife. A tool that had once brought him comfort now felt like a sorry shield against an unseen enemy. He tried to rationalize his fear, attribute it to stress or isolation, but deep inside, a voice echoed what folklore warned. He was not alone. And so Jack retreated further into himself, locking away his thoughts from the world outside. Days blurred into one another, a relentless cycle punctuated by sleepless nights filled with visions of the Wendigo lurking just beyond the trees. The woods that had once been familiar now seemed foreign and hostile, each snow-covered branch casting eerie shapes against the glint of moonlight. As dawn approached each day, it brought little solace, just another reminder that running wouldn't save him. He was trapped within both his mind and the relentless grasp of the sinister force closing in around him. As Jack sat in his cabin, The weight of dread pressed heavily on his chest, and the shadows seemed to whisper secrets he couldn't quite grasp. The haunting imagery of the Wendigo loomed larger in his mind, fueled by nights devoid of sleep and days filled with paranoia. He felt a restless energy building within him, a primal urge to confront whatever was haunting him. The legends he had once brushed off as mere folklore now felt like chains binding him to fear. He realized that staying within the confines of his cabin was only intensifying his sense of dread. With a deep breath, Jack made a fateful decision. He would leave the safety of his home and venture deeper into the forest, the very place that both terrified and fascinated him. Perhaps answers lay within the shadows of the trees or at the heart of the wilderness he had long known. The tales spun by locals echoed in his mind, warnings about those who dared to tread too far into Wendigo territory, but desperation overshadowed caution. What was that spirit if not a reflection of his own despair? He armed himself with resolve and his weathered hunting knife, which had become a poor comfort against the unseen predator. As he stepped outside, snow crunched beneath his worn boots, sounding like thunder in the stillness. The air was crisp and biting, filling his lungs with an invigorating chill that momentarily pushed back the darkness gnawing at him. With every step into the thickening woods, Jack felt both exhilaration and terror intertwining. He was no longer just a woodsman but a seeker on the edge of madness. Shadows stretched longer around him, as if mocking his bravery or defiance. He kept moving deeper into the snow-laden depths, hoping to uncover what lay beyond the whispers. Perhaps not just a monster but a truth he needed to confront. In that moment, as doubts clawed at him, he found clarity. Running wouldn't save him. It was time to face whatever awaited in the heart of the forest. As Jack ventured deeper into the forest, the environment around him began to shift into something otherworldly. The trees, once familiar and comforting, twisted grotesquely toward the sky, their limbs resembling gnarled hands reaching for something unseen. Frost clung to their bark like a shroud, and an unnatural chill hung in the air, pressing down on him with a suffocating weight. Jack's breath formed visible clouds as he trudged through the thickening snow, each step feeling heavier than the last. The path that lay ahead seemed to warp and bend before his eyes, leading him in circles through the labyrinthine woods. A sense of profound disorientation enveloped him. Every direction looked the same, as if the forest conspired to keep him from escape. Eerie whispers floated through the air, barely discernible yet unmistakably taunting. A chorus of voices that wrapped around his mind like a vice. They echoed tales of despair and hunger, chilling Jack to his core as he ventured further into this haunting realm. Suddenly, he stumbled upon a clearing where frostbitten trees stood tall and solemn, their heavy branches adorned with glistening icicles that dangled like fangs. In their shadows lay remnants of past lives, shredded clothing caught on branches and traces of long-forgotten campsites covered in thick layers of snow. Each piece told stories of those who had been drawn into this dark embrace, never to return. A wave of dread washed over him as he realized these weren't just relics. They were warnings. Feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon him, Jack's heart raced. The growl he had heard before reverberated again, closer this time, a low rumble resonating through the very earth beneath his feet. Panic surged as he turned suddenly, his instincts screaming at him to flee. The oppressive whispers intensified, swirling around him like a storm of despair, as Jack felt himself being pulled deeper into an abyss where fear reigned supreme. In that moment, he knew that whatever hunted him was not merely a creature, but an embodiment of his darkest fears. A force that relished in his terror and sought to consume him whole. As Jack pressed on through the oppressive darkness, he began to hear the haunting echoes of starving howls that reverberated through the trees, chilling him to his very core. These desperate cries seemed to originate from all directions, swirling around him like an unseen storm, tugging at the edges of his sanity. Each howl was a reminder of the Wendigo's insatiable hunger, a malevolent presence that thrived on fear and despair. The sound clawed at his mind, making him question the fabric of reality itself. Occasionally, Jack would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye, something tall and emaciated that lurked just beyond the reach of his vision. When he turned to face it directly, There was nothing but the cold embrace of the forest, yet the sense of being watched was palpable. Shadows twisted and shifted in ways that defied logic, merging with the night in a dance that felt both predatory and mocking. The air grew heavier as he moved deeper into this waking nightmare, thick with an oppressive silence punctuated only by those agonizing howls. A flicker of white caught his attention, a flash of something skeletal darting between the trees, too quick for him to define. Was it merely his imagination or a trick played by the Wendigo? Each fleeting vision heightened his terror. Every sound sent tremors through his body. Jack felt as if he were walking on the edge of an abyss, teetering between reality and madness. The forest closed in around him, and he could no longer distinguish between the whispers of the wind and the voice of the creature pursuing him. In this place where shadows danced and nightmares took shape, he was acutely aware that something ancient and ravenous was trailing him, relishing in his fear as it drew ever closer. With each step forward, he felt his resolve wane. Running wouldn't save him from this horror. It only deepened its grip on his soul. As Jack stumbled into a frozen clearing, the air grew thick with an inexplicable tension, the silence punctuated only by the whispering wind. His heart pounded like a war drum in his chest, and he felt the adrenaline surge through his veins as he faced the reality of what lay before him. There, silhouetted against the dim light of the moon, was the Wendigo, a towering figure draped in shadows, its gaunt body stretched impossibly thin, with hollow eyes that glimmered like ice. The creature's presence was suffocating, an aura of hunger and despair radiating from it as if it thrived on Jack's terror. He stood frozen for a moment, rooted to the spot by a visceral fear that sent shivers down his spine. The howls he had heard echoed in his mind, now transformed into a dreadful cacophony that resonated within the depths of his soul. But as dread washed over him, something shifted. In that fleeting moment of clarity, Jack understood that running would not save him. This was not merely survival but a confrontation with his own darkness. He clenched his hunting knife tightly, its familiar weight grounding him amidst the chaos. "What do you want from me?" he shouted into the night, anger and fear intertwining in his voice. The Wendigo responded with a low growl that reverberated through the forest like thunder. It stepped closer, revealing skin stretched taut over bones, a ghastly visage of insatiable hunger. Jack felt time slow, every detail sharpened, the frost clinging to its limbs and the glint of razor-sharp teeth bared in hunger. In that moment of excruciating clarity, Jack realized that this entity represented everything he had feared, desperation and loss personified. Instead of succumbing to panic, he leaned into his understanding. He was not just facing a monster but confronting his own deepest insecurities and failures. With renewed determination, Jack lifted his knife high. The Wendigo's howl pierced through the night air as their eyes locked, two forces colliding in a battle where neither could afford to back down. In this primal confrontation laden with fear and adrenaline, Jack understood. Whatever happened next would define him, not just as a woodsman but as a man ready to confront his fate head-on. The moment Jack lifted his knife, the Wendigo lunged, its elongated limbs moving with unnatural speed. Jack's heart raced as he sidestepped its grasp, the air crackling with malevolence. He felt the icy wind swirl around them, carrying an aura of despair that threatened to engulf him. In that fleeting moment, all thoughts of survival emptied from his mind. It was only him and this embodiment of his fears locked in a primal struggle. Jack slashed at the shadows that loomed closer, adrenaline coursing through him as he fought against both the creature and the paralyzing dread creeping into his heart. Every movement was a fight against despair as he darted between trees, desperately trying to outmaneuver an adversary that thrived on fear itself. The Wendigo's howls pierced through the night air, each sound filled with hunger, an echo that resonated in Jack's bones, reminding him of everything he stood to lose. He stumbled through thick underbrush, snow crunching beneath his feet, as exhaustion clawed at him. The cold began to seep into his muscles, but he pushed against it, refusing to let despair take root. In the corner of his vision, he glimpsed the Wendigo again, its gaunt visage twisted in an expression that blended hunger with amusement. It relished in his fear, The more desperate Jack became, the stronger its hold grew. In a fleeting moment of clarity amid the chaos, Jack recalled the tales of those who had succumbed to madness and despair, how they allowed themselves to become prey. He steadied himself and faced the creature defiantly. "You don't own me!" he shouted, channeling his fear into rage. With renewed determination, he charged forward instead of fleeing. The Wendigo recoiled slightly at his boldness. Perhaps this was no ordinary prey willing to submit. Jack swung his knife wildly, hoping to strike fear into its icy heart instead of allowing it to devour his own spirit. As their clash unfolded beneath a canopy of malevolent shadows, each moment felt like an eternity stretched thin between life and death. In this battle for survival, both physical and mental, Jack understood one harsh truth. Running wouldn't save him now. He had to confront what he feared most within himself to emerge victorious over this ancient terror. Jack's heart raced, the bitter cold seeping through his clothes as he faced the Wendigo, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. In the midst of their relentless struggle, moments of reflection began to surface amid the chaos. He could hear the creature's breath, a raspy wheeze that echoed his own labored gasps, and for the first time, he realized that this battle was not merely physical but a confrontation with his very soul. In those fleeting seconds between slashes and sidesteps, Jack thought about his past. The friends lost to despair and hunger, mirroring the Wendigo's insatiable appetite. The creature was not just a monster. It was a manifestation of his own failures and regrets, a dark mirror reflecting all he had tried to escape. Each howl that pierced the night seemed to carry with it a message he couldn't ignore. Running had never been an option. He could only confront what hunted him. As Jack swung his knife with renewed ferocity, he felt another layer of dread lift momentarily. This creature thrived on fear, growing stronger with every ounce of despair that clouded his mind. Accepting that fate was unavoidable, acknowledging that death might be waiting in the shadows, brought a strange sense of clarity. Rather than cowering, he needed to channel that fear into strength. With each thrust of his blade, Jack fought against not just the Wendigo but also the paralyzing memories that threatened to overwhelm him. "I am not your prey," he shouted defiantly, voice cracking with emotion yet filled with newfound resolve. The air around them crackled with energy as he embraced both fear and acceptance. The Wendigo paused for an instant, its hollow eyes narrowing as it sensed Jack's transformation from a hunted man into a warrior facing his truths. In this moment of profound understanding, Jack realized that survival meant moving forward with no expectations or guarantees, just raw determination against whatever fate awaited him. This was more than a fight against a monster. It was an embrace of life itself in the face of overwhelming darkness. And with that realization came an unshakable courage ignited from within, a flame that would either fuel his victory or guide him into oblivion. The air crackled with tension as Jack and the Wendigo locked eyes, a moment suspended in time where fear and determination collided. In that instant, Jack understood the true nature of his struggle. It was not just a fight for survival, but a profound reckoning with himself. As they clashed amid the twisted trees, he felt the weight of generations of stories press upon him, the legends of those who had been consumed by despair and darkness. With each swing of his knife, he could feel the Wendigo's insatiable hunger pushing against him. But Jack wasn't merely defending himself. He was carving out a place for hope amid the shadows that threatened to engulf him. Every blow he delivered was a declaration. He would not allow fear to dictate his fate. In this raw confrontation, he embraced the chaos of his emotions, transforming dread into resolve. Gradually, as the struggle wore on, Jack began to notice something shifting within himself. The Wendigo's roars became distant echoes of his past failures and insecurities, reminding him that he had survived hardship before. Each breath pulled from deep within revealed a flicker of strength he hadn't realized was there, the courage to stand firm against whatever might come next. As dawn broke softly over the horizon, casting pale light through the branches, Jack felt an overwhelming sense of acceptance wash over him. He was no longer just a woodsman hiding from his fears. He was a man confronting them head-on. In that acceptance lay a transformative power, one that gave him clarity about survival and existence. Whether he emerged from this battle alive or fell into oblivion beneath the weight of the Wendigo's hunger mattered less than how he faced it all. Jack understood now that fear was an inescapable part of life, but embracing it could lead to liberation rather than despair. With every ounce of ferocity left in him, he surged forward again, ready to face whatever fate awaited, this time not as prey but as a champion of his own spirit, igniting the flame of resilience against the dark unknown.